I just know you're ready to hear about a little crime. Welcome to Crime Daddies.
Warning, this podcast is hosted by two true crime dads that will talk about murder, drugs, rape, and offenses against children. We may crack jokes and make light of something so terrible that has happened, but it will never be about the victim or the victim's family. You have been warned.
And welcome back, everybody, to Crime Daddies. My name is Jacob.
And I am Hunter.
And we are so pumped for another episode, another case. And we appreciate you guys having all the feedback on our last few cases. Good Lord, we've been hearing a lot of cool stuff from you guys. But Hunter's got a pretty crazy case today. And this is your first one away from SEMO?
This is my first case that has nothing to do with SEMO.
Wow, look at you branching out. You're going all over the place, ain't you?
But it is SEMO's next door neighbor, the Ozarks. So, I mean, I'm not branching out too far, but I've spent a lot of time in the Ozarks throughout the years. So, it's a place that holds my heart. So I figured I would bring a case from the Ozarks.
And yeah, we're just pumped to have a case from the Ozarks and let another part of Missouri kind of get into what we have going over here at Crime Daddies. So I'm pumped to hear it.
Long before the Ozarks became known for sprawling lakes, tourist attractions, and country music shows, this rugged landscape held a very different identity. Stretching across parts of Missouri, Arkansas, Oklahoma, and Kansas, the Ozarks are considered America's oldest highland region. Towering bluffs, dense forests, winding rivers, and hidden hollows have shaped both the land and the people who call it home. But the story of the Ozarks didn't begin with settlers or tourists. It began thousands of years ago. The Ozark Plateau was formed over millions of years, creating a rugged wilderness of limestone ridges, caves, and thick woodlands. For centuries, Native American tribes lived, hunted, and traveled throughout the region. Among them were the Osage people, whose territory stretched across much of what we now know as the Ozarks. For generations, the land provided food, shelter, and a way of life. But that would eventually change. As European powers expanded into North America, French explorers began mapping the vast interior of the continent. In 1673, explorers Jacques Marquette and Louis Jolliet traveled through areas surrounding the region. Historians believe the name Ozarks may have originated from a French phrase that eventually evolved into the word we know today. By the early 1800s, the region was undergoing dramatic change. Following the War of 1812, waves of settlers arrived from Tennessee, Kentucky, and the Carolinas. Many were descendants of Scottish pioneers seeking land and opportunity. They brought with them traditions, music, dialects, and a fiercely independent spirit that would become synonymous with Ozark culture. Life was rarely easy. The rocky hills and steep terrain made large-scale farming difficult. Families often relied on subsistence farming, growing only enough food to survive. Hunting, trapping, and timber work became essential parts of everyday life. Then came one of the darkest chapters in American history. During the 19th century, Native American tribes were forcibly removed from their ancestral lands. Portions of the Ozarks became part of designated Indian territory, and sections of the region witnessed the movement of Cherokee people along the Trail of Tears, a tragic journey that claimed thousands of lives. As a nation moved towards civil war, the Ozarks found themselves caught in the middle. Border state loyalties divided families and communities. Rather than traditional battlefield engagements, much of the violence came in the form of brutal guerrilla warfare. Raids, ambushes, and acts of retaliation left scars that lingered long after the war ended. Yet the people of the Ozarks endured. When farming alone couldn't provide enough income, residents turned to other industries. Lead and zinc mining boomed throughout parts of the region. Timber companies harvested vast stretches of forest, and deep in secluded hollows, some families became known for producing homemade whiskey, giving rise to the area's legendary moonshining culture. By the 20th century, however, the Ozarks were about to experience a transformation unlike anything before. Massive dam projects altered the landscape forever. In 1931, the construction of the Bagnell Dam created Lake of the Ozarks, flooding valleys and submerging entire communities beneath the water. Towns that had existed for generations disappeared beneath the newly formed lake. What had once been isolated wilderness slowly evolved into a destination. Tourists arrived by thousands. Resorts sprang up along the shoreline. Fishing, boating, and recreation became major industries. In time, places like Branson, Missouri, and Mountain View, Arkansas gained national attention for preserving the region's music, storytelling, and folk traditions. Today, the Ozarks are a fascinating blend of post and present. Modern businesses and tourism generate billions of dollars each year, yet echoes of the region's pioneer heritage remain visible in the small towns, traditions, and culture. It's a place where history still feels close, where stories are passed down through generations, and where a rugged landscape continues to shape life much as it has for centuries. For our story today, it's important to understand that backdrop, because the case we're about to examine unfolded in these hills, forests, and winding back roads, a landscape that has hidden secrets for generations. Missouri's Ozark Hills have long been a place where people disappear into wilderness. Dense forests stretch for miles, gravel roads twist through isolated valleys, small farms sit hidden from view. For most residents, that isolation is a way of life. But in the winter of 1997, it became something far more terrifying. For 6 months, law enforcement agencies across central Missouri hunted a man they described as armed and dangerous and unpredictable. He moved through rural communities like a ghost, breaking into homes, stealing vehicles, and leaving behind frightened victims. Then the bodies began to appear. A man found shot in his own home. A woman discovered tied up and executed in her bedroom. And investigators began to realize they weren't dealing with a desperate fugitive anymore. They were hunting a serial killer. This is the story of Alice Ben Johns.
Serial killer. Hunter, you and these serial killers, I feel like you got a connection to them.
I am definitely fascinated by serial killers, not because of them doing the killing itself, but just being in their minds, like how one comes to enjoy these acts of violence. Like, I'll never understand it.
I think one of the most intriguing things about serial killers for me is just the sheer volume, the amount they're able to do. Most people that kill somebody, they just have, they just do it and they end up getting caught or whatever. These people do it multiple times. And just like what drives them to keep going and keep going and keep going. Like, does it, I guess they're never able to scratch that itch completely.
It's kind of like people that get addicted to, I guess you could say, meth or heroin. They do it one time and they get such a huge rush from it, and then they get addicted and they start doing it more and more and more, trying to chase that first high.
Right. It's definitely along those lines from things I've watched and read and all the things. There are people that can do it and just stop, and then people that are, like you said, for lack of better words, addicts.
And the reason I like the Ozarks so much is because I am an outdoorsman and I do hunt over in the Ozarks. But my dad and his whole side of the family are from the Ozarks. So, like, when I was talking about being small farmers, being in the timber industry and struggling and not having a whole lot, that was my dad's whole childhood. So, I heavily relate to the Ozarks.
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting ties, and it's just fun to see the dichotomy, the difference between people there and people here, but also how they're very similar, but they're really just shaped by their environment, right?
I grew up in SEMO. I still live in SEMO. I've learned a lot from my dad throughout the years, and I'm still a hillbilly at heart. Like, I honestly feel you could drop me off in the middle of the woods and I could survive.
Yeah, I bet you could. I moved over to the Ozarks a little bit whenever I was in middle school, and it definitely was a different life compared to how it is back here. Like I remember getting 2 weeks off of school for deer season, and I was like, "What the heck? 2 weeks off for deer season?" And they're like, "Yeah, it is," and it's because in that part of the world, like you talked about earlier, going and getting food is like still a viable way of providing. It's more important to them than it is back here because over in the hills, it's putting food on the table.
I tell you how big of a deal deer season is in the Ozarks. So my dad is from Texas County, like Texas County and Shannon County, Missouri. And I remember him telling me like they just shot deer year round because like people didn't waste meat. Like if you went out and you shot a deer, you would eat that deer, and that's how people was able to survive. And I remember he told me one time the sheriff of Texas County actually shot one of those robot deer out the side of the road and got in trouble.
That's hilarious.
All right, but anyways, we're going off on a tangent. Let's get into this story.
Let's do.
In the spring of 1996, Alice Ben Johns began spending time with a man named Thomas Stewart. The two traveled in similar social circles throughout Pulaski County, Missouri. They drank together frequently and knew many of the same people. To outsiders, there appeared to be nothing unusual about their relationship, but beneath the surface, tensions were beginning to grow. One of the people connecting the two men was a woman named Deborah Tedder. As October approached, relationships within the group had become strained. Arguments were common, alcohol often fueled confrontations. Then came the night of October 1st, 1996, a night that would change everything. Stewart had reportedly been arguing with Tedder throughout the day. Later that evening, Johns accepted a ride from her. The three individuals were heavily intoxicated. At some point along rural Highway KK, Stewart followed Tedder's vehicle in his truck. What happened next would only be reconstructed through physical evidence and witness statements, but investigators believe Stewart eventually confronted Tedder and Johns on the side of the road. The confrontation quickly turned violent. Glass shattered, two windows in Tedder's car were destroyed, voices echoed into darkness, and somewhere amid the chaos, Johns exited the vehicle carrying a .22 caliber pistol. Moments later, gunfire erupted. One shot, then another, then another. By the time the shooting stopped, Thomas Stewart had been hit 7 times. He was dead.
Wow.
At approximately 10 p.m., a local couple happened upon this scene while driving home from a family gathering. What they saw must have been unsettling. A pickup truck sat stopped in the roadway. A small white car was nearby, and a man appeared to be lying face down on the ground. Concerned, the couple slowed their vehicle. Perhaps they intended to help. Perhaps they thought there had been an accident. Instead, a man standing near the vehicles repeatedly told them, quote, "Everything's all right, just go on." The couple drove away. They had no way of knowing they had just encountered the aftermath of a homicide. For nearly another hour, Thomas Stewart's body remained on the roadside. Then another motorist arrived. They were returning home from work at Fort Leonard Wood when she discovered the scene. Unlike the earlier witnesses, she immediately recognized something was terribly wrong. She contacted authorities. Police and paramedics rushed to Highway KK, but there was nothing they could do for Thomas Stewart. He was already gone. Investigators worked through the night. The crime scene revealed disturbing details. 7 .22 caliber shell casings were recovered near the body, and an 8th casing was discovered the following morning. Nearby officers located broken glass and bloodstains marking where Tedder's vehicle had been parked. The evidence suggested a violent confrontation had unfolded within a confined area. Yet one critical piece was missing: the murder weapon. Despite extensive searching, investigators could not find the firearm used to kill Stewart. The next morning, police located Deborah Tedder. When questioned, she suggested that Alice Johns may have been involved in the murder. Officers also noticed damage to her vehicle: 2 shattered windows, a puncture resembling a bullet hole, and what appeared to be blood spatter. The evidence was mounting, but there was one problem: Johns had vanished. Law enforcement quickly learned that Johns had been staying on a small farm owned by a woman named Pearl Rose. When officers arrived there, he was gone. A search of the property uncovered .22 caliber shell casings. Crime lab technicians later compared those casings to evidence collected from Stewart's murder scene. The results were inconclusive. Investigators could not prove the shells came from the same weapon, but they did share significant characteristics. For detectives, it was another piece of the puzzle, and the puzzle was pointing in one direction: Alice Ben Johns. But before police could arrest him, he disappeared into rural Missouri. And for the next 6 months, the manhunt would grow into something far more sinister, because investigators soon discovered that Stewart's death had not been an isolated act of violence. It was only the beginning. By the fall of 1996, investigators in Pulaski County believed they knew who had killed Thomas Stewart. The problem wasn't identifying the suspect. The problem was finding him. Alice Ben Johns had vanished. No arrests, no surrender, no reliable sightings, just rumors. And in the Ozarks, rumors travel faster than facts. Some people claimed Johns was hiding in hunting cabins deep in the woods. Others believed he was moving from farm to farm under the cover of darkness. A few whispered that he had already left Missouri entirely, but authorities weren't convinced. They believed he was still close, watching, waiting, surviving, and they were right, because while law enforcement searched for him, Johns was quietly becoming more dangerous. For 6 months, Johns lived as a fugitive. Every passing day increased the pressure. His photograph appeared on wanted posters. Officers circulated his description throughout central Missouri. Residents were warned not to approach him, yet somehow he continued to evade capture. To understand how, it's important to understand the terrain. Central Missouri is filled with isolated properties, cabins hidden among trees, old farmhouses miles from the nearest neighbors, and back roads that seem to lead nowhere. A person familiar with this area could move through it largely unseen, and investigators would later discover that Johns was doing exactly that, breaking into homes, stealing supplies, taking weapons, moving constantly, never staying in one place long enough to be caught. Each successful escape made him more confident and more desperate, a dangerous combination. Then in February of 1997, the situation escalated dramatically. On February 7th, nearly 4 months after Stewart's murder, a man named Ron Wilson returned home expecting an ordinary day. Instead, he walked into a nightmare. Standing on his property was Alice Johns. The fugitive had entered Wilson's home and stolen a shotgun. Before Wilson could react, Johns fired the weapon. One blast struck the ceiling. Another was fired directly toward Wilson. Miraculously, Wilson survived. But Johns wasn't finished. He stole Wilson's vehicle, then took two firearms, a hunting knife, and a watch before fleeing the scene. The encounter demonstrated something investigators had feared. Johns was becoming increasingly brazen. No longer content to hide, he was confronting victims directly, and each successful crime increased his arsenal. Every stolen gun made him far more dangerous. Every stolen vehicle made him harder to track, and every escape reinforced the belief that he could continue outrunning the law. Just 19 days later, John struck again. This time his targets were Bud and Melinda Vaverka. The couple found themselves staring down the barrel of a gun after Johns forced his way into their home. Imagine the fear. Outside, winter winds swept through the Missouri countryside. Inside, an armed fugitive stood in the living room. The Vaverkas had no idea what he might do. Would he rob them? Would he kill them? Would they survive the encounter? Instead, John said something almost surreal. He warmed himself by their stove. For a brief period, he acted less like a violent criminal and more like a weary traveler seeking shelter. But the gun ensured everyone understood the reality of the situation. This was a fugitive holding a family hostage. When he finally left, he took only a few items: $2, a wallet, and some juice. The theft itself was insignificant, but the encounter revealed something alarming. Johns was deteriorating. He wasn't carrying out carefully planned robberies. He was surviving day to day, driven by immediate needs: food, shelter, transportation, and weapons. That kind of desperation can make a fugitive extraordinarily unpredictable, and investigators feared the worst was still ahead. Unfortunately, they were right, because only 2 days later, someone would be murdered. February 28, 1997, Camden County, Missouri. The discovery shocked investigators. Inside his home, Leonard Bull was laid dead. He had been shot once in the head with a .22 caliber firearm. Unlike the chaotic roadside shooting that claimed Thomas Stewart's life months earlier, this killing appeared deliberate, controlled, execution-like. Whoever pulled the trigger had intended to leave no survivors. Authorities immediately began processing the scene, and this time the evidence would be far more difficult for the killer to explain away. Investigators soon discovered that Voel's Ford Ranger pickup truck was missing. So was his .22 caliber rifle. The murder appeared connected to robbery, but the physical evidence told an even more compelling story. Outside the residence, officers found a shoe impression. When examined, it matched the pattern of John's right boot. Not similar, not merely consistent, a direct match. Then came another breakthrough. When Voel's stolen truck was recovered days later, investigators discovered fingerprints. Those prints belonged to Alice Johns. Suddenly, the fugitive was no longer merely suspected of murder. Evidence was beginning to place him directly at crime scenes. And while detectives worked to build their case, another tragedy was unfolding nearby, one that would further cement John's reputation as a killer. March 9th, 1997, only a few miles from where Leonard Voel's had been found, authorities made another grim discovery. This time, the victim was Wilma Bragg. The scene was horrifying. Bragg was found on her bed. Her hands had been tied behind her back. She was lying face down. She had been shot twice in the back of the head. The positioning of the body suggested complete helplessness. Whoever killed her had controlled the situation from the beginning to end. There had been no chance to fight back, no chance to escape, no chance to survive. For investigators, the similarities were impossible to ignore. A stolen vehicle, a stolen firearm, a victim executed inside her own home. and a fugitive already linked to another homicide. The evidence began to pile up rapidly. DNA recovered from a cigarette butt connected Johns to this crime. Ballistics analysis revealed that a rifle stolen from Leonard Bull's residence had been used in Bragg's murder. Then investigators found yet another critical piece: Wilma Bragg's stolen Toyota. Inside was a murder weapon itself, the same rifle linking the two crimes together. At that moment, detectives began seeing the full picture. This wasn't a series of unrelated incidents. This was a violent crime spree crossing county lines, and it was accelerating. News traveled quickly through rural communities. People locked their doors. Neighbors checked on one another. Farmers kept firearms close at hand. Many residents had never experienced anything like it. A fugitive suspected of multiple murders was moving freely through the countryside. No one knew where he would appear next, or who he might target. The uncertainty became part of the terror. Every unfamiliar vehicle sparked concern. Every barking dog in the middle of the night raised questions. Every knock on the door felt different, because somewhere out there, investigators believe Alice Johns was still watching for his next opportunity. And despite an expanding manhunt, he remained free, for now. But the final chapter of the hunt was approaching. Soon, a woman named Beverly Guhair would enter the story, and a confrontation in a remote Missouri cabin would bring the largest manhunt of the year to a dramatic and violent end. By March 1997, investigators were no longer searching for a simple murder suspect. They were hunting a fugitive linked to multiple homicides, armed robberies, home invasions, stolen vehicles, and burglaries spanning several Missouri counties. The case had become one of the largest manhunts many local agencies had ever faced. Yet despite roadblocks, search teams, and countless tips from the public, Alice Ben Johns remained elusive. Each day he avoided capture created new questions. How was he surviving? Who was helping him? And where would he strike next? Authorities would soon discover part of the answer: a woman named Beverly Guhair. Details of those final weeks paint a picture of a man completely committed to life as a fugitive. Johns and Beverly moved place to place, avoiding attention and staying one step ahead of law enforcement whenever possible. Investigators later connected the pair to at least 4 additional burglaries. The crimes followed a familiar pattern: remote homes, stolen supplies, weapons, and property taken and later recovered in Johns' possession.
You know, it's so interesting now that we know that there was a second person involved, and it makes it make more sense, right? The things he was doing by himself seem kind of far fetched while also being on the run. It just makes sense he has somebody helping him with these things. I mean, it looks like he found himself a ride or die Bonnie and Clyde type situation he found himself in.
Yeah, I'd say so.
Guys, do not sensationalize relationships like this. If your partner doesn't check you on your dumb ideas, then they're probably not your soulmate. If they're like, yeah, you know what? Maybe we should rob this house, they're not the one for you.
No, because you'll eventually flip on each other.
Exactly. It does not end well. It either end up in jail or dead. Like, literally, you need to have someone that keeps you in check. I know my old lady will humble me most of the time.
What made the investigation easier for detectives, but only in hindsight, was a trail Johns continued to leave behind. Fingerprints, stolen items, witness accounts, evidence had accumulated steadily. The problem wasn't proving who committed the crimes. The problem was finding him before someone else died. And that concern weighed heavily on investigators, because the pattern suggested increasing violence. The murders of Leonard Bowles and Wilma Bragg had demonstrated a willingness to kill strangers. That reality changed everything. Victims were no longer limited to personal acquaintances. Anyone could become a target: a homeowner, a hunter, a farmer, a traveler, anyone unfortunate enough to cross paths with him.
Yeah, you could just be going about your normal life. Nothing's different. And then here you are, a victim of this hillbilly Bonnie and Clyde couple. Wild.
Imagine just walking through the woods and this guy comes upon you and robs you, like out of nowhere. Couldn't be me because I keep a 40 on me when I'm walking through the woods. But
I'm about to say, I'm surprised he got away with what he did, because I know a lot of people that live in the Ozarks, and they are believers in their Second Amendment rights, to say the least, right? And so I'm surprised he didn't find himself in some more trouble.
yeah, but I mean, you can own guns and you can have them on you, but like if somebody catches you by surprise and he's already got you at gunpoint before you can do anything, That's how he gets away with it.
Right. He's calculated, but he's also not calculated, if that makes sense. Like, it sounds like he knows the element of surprise is how to get him, but he also leaves behind evidence and carries evidence with him. So whenever he does get caught, it's like, obviously, it's this guy. He's smart, but he's also stupid.
As winter turned to spring, pressure intensified. Law enforcement agencies coordinated information. Tips poured in from across the state. Some proved useful, most did not. But one lead would finally bring officers face to face with the man they had been hunting for 6 months. April 7th, 1997, Benton County, Missouri. The search had narrowed toward the area surrounding Coal Camp Creek. Officers from the Missouri Water Patrol were assisting in efforts to locate the fugitive. The terrain was rugged. Cabins and isolated structures dotted the landscape, perfect places for someone trying to remain hidden. As officers approached one particular cabin, they likely understood the risks. By then, Johns was believed responsible for multiple murders. He was known to carry firearms, and he had repeatedly demonstrating a willingness to use them. No one expected a peaceful surrender. Still, what happened next shocked even seasoned officers. As law enforcement closed in on the cabin, the door suddenly burst open. Standing there was Alice Ben Johns, but he wasn't alone. In front of him was Beverly Guher, and according to reports, Johns was using her as a human shield, one arm wrapped around her neck, a rifle aimed toward her head. The message was unmistakable. If officers acted recklessly, someone could die.
What a piece of shit, first off, right? Just, if you're caught, you're caught. You think using her as a shield in that moment is going to somehow end with you free?
No,
In
but
what scenario do you think a police officer is going to say, you know what, don't hurt the woman, you're good to go?
it's just a last resort to still try and make an escape, even though you're kind of caught at that point because you're either going to shoot the person you have hostage, or the cops are going to shoot you, or you're going to shoot the cops and you both die. So, in these scenarios, there's never really a good outcome unless he just surrenders.
Yeah, you're buying yourself a few extra seconds at the most. So, I don't know. But adrenaline's high. You're at the end of it. You don't think clearly. I understand. So,
Then came the threat. He said, quote, "I've got a hostage, I'll shoot her," end quote. In that instant, the situation transformed from a fugitive search into a hostage crisis. Every decision mattered. Every second counted. Officers had to weigh the risk to Gohair's life against the danger posed by Johns. A dangerous balance. One wrong move could trigger a tragedy. What happened next unfolded in seconds. Witnesses later described Johns making a sudden movement. Whether he was attempting to flee, whether he was preparing to fire, whether he was trying to reposition himself, only those present know exactly what they saw. But one officer recognized an immediate threat. Officer Eric Gottman fired.
bam.
The bullet struck Johns in the abdomen. The standoff was over almost instantly. After 6 months on the run, one of Missouri's most wanted fugitives was finally in custody, alive, wounded, and facing a mountain of evidence.
Dang, dude, I feel like I'm watching a movie. Like, I can see a standoff in my head. You know exactly how those scenes go down. And most of the time, they end with the guy dead. So I'm glad this time it ended with him just getting wounded, but alive enough to still face the consequences. He didn't just end up get the easy way out. I think death is the easy way out for guys like this.
Yeah, I agree. And Jacob, I'm glad you said that you're actually able to paint this image in your head because, just to go off on a little side note here, I've been trying to, when I write these scripts, to be able to portray them better as you all being able to play the story out in your head.
It's very like narrative, kind of like reading a book where you can like picture it, and that's what I'm doing.
For investigators, the arrest represented relief. The killings had stopped. The burglaries had stopped. The fear gripping rural communities could finally begin to ease. But another challenge remained, proving the case in court. As prosecutors prepared for the trial, they assembled evidence gathered from numerous crime scenes. The case against Johns was extensive. Witnesses had placed him near Thomas Stewart shortly before Stewart's death. Physical evidence connected him to multiple burglaries. Fingerprints linked him to stolen property. Boot impressions connected him to crime scenes. DNA evidence tied him to the murder of Wilma Bragg. Ballistic testing connected stolen firearms to the killings. And perhaps most importantly, investigators were able to establish a pattern. a timeline showing a fugitive moving across Missouri while committing increasingly violent crimes. Jurors would hear about stolen vehicles, stolen weapons, threats, home invasions, and murders. One piece at a time, the picture became difficult to ignore. Eventually, Johns was convicted of first-degree murder in Pulaski County. The punishment was severe, a death sentence. Good job. He deserves that. For many observers, his sentence seemed like the final chapter. The communities affected by the crimes hoped the legal process had reached its conclusion, but the story wasn't quite over. Years later, legal developments would again place Johns at the center of courtroom proceedings. In 2002, the United States Supreme Court issued a landmark decision in the case of Atkins versus Virginia. The ruling determined that individuals with intellectual disabilities cannot be executed under the Constitution. The decision forced courts throughout the country to reevaluate certain death penalty cases. Johns' attorney pursued post-conviction relief. During those proceedings, a Missouri court examined evidence regarding his intellectual functioning. Ultimately, the court concluded that Johns met the legal definition of intellectual disability and therefore could not be executed.
Wow.
The ruling fundamentally changed the course of his case. The state did not appeal the decision. As a result, the finding became final. Later, when prosecutors sought the death penalty in another murder case involving Johns, courts ruled that the earlier determination prevented the state from pursuing execution. The legal battles continued, but the possibility of a death sentence was removed.
Isn't that wild? In back-to-back cases that we covered, the one we did last week and the one we did this week covers like a Supreme Court finding saying, last week it said if you were too young, you can't be executed. And this one says if you have a disability, you can't be executed. I don't know.
Yeah,
it's
but
weird. Back-to-back cases, back-to-back weeks of these very similar things happening.
yeah, but if you look at a lot of the cases that's happened in the last 10 years, it's getting harder and harder to get off on using like insanity or low functioning and stuff like that. Like they're starting to say, no,
Yeah, they're getting rid of you regardless.
yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure if this happened nowadays, in the state of Missouri, we tend to follow whatever Texas does by design. Missouri's always been that way. It's like I don't know why, but there's some cool history behind it. If you guys are interested, I won't get off onto that. But Missouri follows what Texas does. So if Texas is strict on something, Missouri tends to be reflective of that. And so I'm sure if this happened in the 2020s, this guy likely would be sent to the chair or Missouri lethal injection. We don't have any cool ways of capital punishment like other states do. I forget which state over on the East Coast does a firing squad still. Maybe South Carolina, I think.
Yeah, I believe the only case we've covered where a death sentence was actually followed through was Tommy Lynn Sells.
I think so too. Honestly, and that was our third episode, and here we are like 20 weeks into it almost, and now we still haven't found a case where another person has been actually put to death.
Typically, they die before their death penalty ever gets, to the point of them receiving
Right.
their death.
Because they have so many appeals, and the way the courts work, it's so slow that they can just put off their death until they just die naturally.
And, like we've talked about, I'm not a huge fan of the death penalty unless, like, the evidence is overwhelmingly guilty because there has been a lot of people been put to death that's later been found innocent. But like I said about Tommy Lynn Sells and about Cecil Barriner, like, if the evidence is overwhelmingly proving your guilt, why do we need you in society?
Yep. Like Hunter has said before, you become Old Yeller at that point, and we don't care about you.
Sorry, not sorry. Today, the crimes committed during those 6 months remain a haunting chapter in Missouri's criminal history. The story contains many elements commonly associated with notorious manhunts, a fugitive disappearing into remote wilderness, communities living in fear, investigators racing against time, violence escalating with each passing week, and beyond the headlines were real people whose lives were forever changed: Thomas Stewart, Leonard Boyles, Wilma Bragg, and numerous victims who survived robberies and home invasions. Families were left searching for answers. Communities were left rebuilding a sense of safety, and law enforcement officers carried memories of a case unlike any other. The capture of Alice Ben Johns ended the violence, but it did not erase the damage. Cases like this remind us that some of the most frightening crimes didn't occur in major cities. Sometimes they happen on a quiet country road, in isolated homes, in places where neighbors know each other's names, places that seem safe, until one person changes everything. For 6 months, Missouri searched for a ghost, a man who slipped through forests, farm fields, and rural communities while leaving tragedy in his wake. Eventually, the hunt ended, but the story remains, a chilling reminder of how quickly violence can spread and how difficult it can be to stop it once it begins.
What a guy. I wonder what happened to that woman that he was with.
I'm not entirely sure. I didn't go into much research about her after she, was held hostage.
Right.
I just mainly focused on Ellis Ben Johns, but I would assume that she got some sort of charges by, you
That being
know,
involved, yeah.
yeah, helping him escape and all that. But isn't it wild? Like, that's why you can't trust people. You'll flip on each other once things get like real and real fast.
She sounds like she's another victim of being fooled by somebody's confidence and the way they just slick talk her. It just happens. And there's a lot of cases where evil people are able to manipulate other people into doing things with them. And then once they're removed from that other person, it's like they're a whole different person. Not that I know all the ins and outs of this lady's life and if she was good or bad or whatever, it's not for me to decide. But if you're able to be easily manipulated, you can find yourself in situations where you're helping people do bad things. You are what they call an enabler. And it sounds like that's what she was for him, at least. Not even just an enabler, but an active participant in what he was doing until she became a victim herself.
But everybody, that was my first case that did not have any ties to SEMO. So I hope that you enjoyed the way we told that story. Obviously, we don't enjoy what he did to these victims because they did not deserve this. He is a piece of shit scumbag.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, he's the worst of the worst. It was pretty different for you to go out of SEMO. I know it's still pretty close. You mentioned a few counties and stuff that I'm familiar with, so it's not like I'm completely lost in what you're talking about, which is nice. That's one thing about the local crimes I like. I like listening to because I can kind of picture these areas and put myself in this perspective, which is harder to do in places we're not used to.
At the end of the day, this man was nothing more than a low-life coward behind a gun.
That's what he was. Another guy that had a power complex and just needed to exert his power on people that otherwise probably would never be around this man.
But again, everybody, thank you so much for joining us week after week as we drop these different crime episodes from around our area in Missouri.
Yeah, it's so awesome to hear you guys in our comments being vocal participants in what we do and letting us know feedback and talking to us and having this dialogue and discussion. It's so awesome. And one way for you to continue doing that is a very simple agreement we can make together that if I promise to put out a new episode every Tuesday at 5 a.m., then you just do me a favor and go to Spotify or Apple or wherever you can give us reviews and leave us 5 stars. That'd be so awesome. I don't know how to explain how it helps us. I just know that it does help us on the algorithms and getting us pushed out to more people. And it's the more people that hear our stories and come in contact with Crime Daddies is a way for us to build up this little community we're starting. So if you guys could do that for us, that'd be awesome. And while you're there, go ahead and comment. Let us know how you liked the episode, any thoughts you might have about this case in particular, or anything you know about the Ozarks. A lot of things happen there, and a lot of things get blown over because they're kind of just tucked away, and there's a lot of history that gets lost in those hills and those woods. So we're definitely going to go back there in the future and tell a lot more stories from the area. Yeah, just go ahead and comment, and you can also do the same thing on social media. You can find us on Facebook at Crime Daddies. And then you can find us on Instagram at Crime Daddies Pod. Now on Instagram, we post some correlating photos the day after the podcast episode comes out. So if you ever want to see the faces that are a part of these cases, then that's the place to go and look. We try and find as many pictures as we can to just toss on there for you guys to see. If you want to follow our personal social medias, you can find me on Facebook. My name is Jacob Smith. And then on Instagram and TikTok, it is Jacob W.C. Smith. And I appreciate all the follows I've been getting. It's been awesome. I try and go back and follow everybody in return. And I've had some pretty cool conversations with you guys. So thanks a ton. And for Hunter, you can go ahead and find him
On Facebook, I am Hunter Ben Frampton. On Instagram, I am hunter.semo. And on TikTok, I am semo_hunter.
And we post a lot of behind the scenes stuff, some stuff about our personal lives as well. So if you're interested in what we do and where we come from, you can see a little bit of a look behind the curtain on the life of a crime daddy, because we're only crime daddies for like a few hours a week. Most of the time, we're just real dads and husbands and employees, and we're just working and living a normal life. But every once in a while, we like to sit in a laundry room and tell scary stories to one another. Last but certainly not least, if you guys would like to go to our website at crimedaddies.riverside.com, there you can subscribe to us and it costs $0. All you do is give us your email address and your name, and you have just signed up for some exclusive content from your crime daddies, meaning we send out a newsletter every month, which has a lot of updates and announcements that you guys hear first, and then we talk about it to the public afterwards. And so if you ever want to hear what's going on behind the scenes, that's the place to go. And from there, you can get links to all the places that we host our podcast on, and you also get access to learn what the next week's episode is going to be before it ever comes out. So, like, for example, if we drop an episode on Tuesday, I send out an email reminder on Monday night saying, hey, we have a new episode coming out. And at the very end of it, I leave like a little hint on what the next week's case is going to be. So if you guys are interested in that and want some behind the scenes notice on what the next week case is going to be, that's the place to do it. But other than that, that's my usual spiel I got for you guys. Thank you so much for being here and listening to these cases. Me and Hunter cannot thank you enough.
And remember, everybody, listen to the crime, don't be the crime.
You heard the man.